I'm James Curry. Well, thank you for attending this. And if you can hear me and see me, that's great. Make this PowerPoint available to Ramsey County as well. I unearthed from Dakota County archives what they had in their news articles, the BIPOC community that lived there in Hastings and in various communities throughout the Dakota County. And I was able to come up with a couple files, both Hastings Pioneer Room had, as well as Lashy in Dakota County. On Blacks, they were kind of like separated into small hierarchy of Blacks in Minnesota, Blacks in the Twin Cities, and Blacks in the county. I unearthed these, or I didn't unearth them. There was some groundwork that had been laid in the 90s and the 80s from historians and volunteers that had sort of differentiated stories of the white community and sort of anything that had to do with Black folks. So upon going through that, I actually have roots, parents that lived in Hastings from 1885 to 1933. That's always been part of the oral. But I thought with this fellowship, I'd expand that story into the entire Dakota County and see if there was overlap. Currently, my direct descendants are from Southside Minneapolis. Father hailed from, and my mother hailed from Wayzata. There's a few of them. Pops, my mother, and I decided to point out Katie McWatt. So the reunion that we had, not a brief reunion, we had a reunion in 08 where all the descendants kind of came together. So back to the Dakota County Fellowship. There are a number of families that were there, but there were two prominent families, the Currys and Wallaces. As close, some were even close in age, and attended school together. Here's another example of Curry and Wallace connection. And then the Currys happened to have 5 boys and 5 girls, and I guess 5 out of the 10 siblings were graduated with honors, and in Florence's case, a valedictorian. I'll forward. And there was an incident of a terrorist act, an incident of hate that occurred that I was also interested in exploring in a more in-depth manner, or as much as I could. I'm by nature a maker, not by nature, by trade, a filmmaker. This idea of gathering subject material, whittling it down to some manageable stories is kind of has been my thing for 25 years or so. I wasn't gonna produce a documentary out of this fellowship, but I still used the same approach of reading as much as I could within the time limit, creating some story threads, finding some subject matter experts if I could, and then creating sort of a Bible of the best bits that might have interlocking stories. And then, of course, the process of assembly, editorial, and polishing. So these are the kind of articles I was encountering. This is a Hastings Gazette article noting the fire of the arson of the church that both the Curry and Wallace families founded in 1892, shortly after their 15-year anniversary. There was no investigation, and really the silence of both the papers, or the media, and the community sent a message. The Black folks that were living in 07 and beyond. Clan activity, as well as non-clan activity in the 1900s that manifest, but their direct correlation that I've come across that connects the clan to the church board. But there were plenty of gatherings. As everybody should know, 1919 was sort of like blood red summer, a peak of hatred between the races here in the US. Anyways, I'm not a historian, but there was an exodus to South Minneapolis. So this migration from a small town to South Minneapolis also could have very well occurred. Another city to moving to families from another rural city moving to Rondo, another rural city moving to the north side. There seems to be patterns. And these are just a few photos. So my challenge was, and I'm sorry, here's some notable African Americans that are direct descendants that came out of those two families, Katie McWatt, as well as Brother Michael Collins, the president of DeLaSalle High School. I wasn't the first to sort of excavate, I'm sorry, I keep using that word, this history. My dad also went down, I guess we had plots in the cemetery that he was interested in, but also, you know, was a man of note because he was connected to a well-loved citizen. Even though they burned their church, that town actually grew to really grew enamored with James Curry, his grandpa, and my great-grandpa. And white students had also explored racial dynamics in the past in Hastings back in the 90s, and it made it in Hastings themselves tended to explore it every once in a while, probably around Black History Month, most likely. Let's see, progress reports. I needed to remain flexible. I work a night shift. I needed to make the trip back and forth and connect with Dakota County. So I kind of got to know both the folks at Lashi and the Pioneer Room, because they were my main sources of data or of articles. Highlights of this, and I'll get into the work a little later. But one of them was the walking tour of Hastings that we formed a relationship with IDEA. They are a nonprofit interested in racial justice, interested in sort of on boots on the ground way. And I was able to take some residents along with Heidi Langenfeld on a tour of some of the historical sites that were associated with Black folks in Hastings that they were unaware of. Another was a collaboration with Setu Jones and Dakota County. Actually, Remy as well. We were able to gather in kind of a multiracial, multi-faceted way, different folks from different backgrounds to get together and discuss the work that's being done. And because oftentimes we work in silos, and I thought this is an opportunity that might be able to come together around food and discuss everyone's work and make some networking possibilities. And it went off great. Kind of broader list of things that were great about this fellowship, the creation that I spoke of with the individuals at Lashe, Matt Carter, Mariah Ring, and Jillian Knight, a Leduc presentation. I enjoyed even the cohort meetings, visiting, finding a cousin that I didn't know about at the Minnesota African American Heritage Museum. Networking, resources, all that stuff was really valuable to me, as was MTM's show or exhibit at Phelps and Hennepin History Museum's exhibit. Low lights, if anybody cares, was work-life balance. I'll just skip that. I don't know if this works. Yeah, there we go. That's just sort of to break up the monotony of stuff. It was me. So what impact was the work that I'm doing going to have on the community? Well, I mean, I think transparency when you unearth stuff, and if it gets exposure, sometimes that leads to accountability. It's not that I'm seeking justice per se to find the perpetrators of the church or wrongdoings, but it speaks for itself. The call to action on my part was, I'm now I was voted a chair to an organization I was associated with. Now we're a BIPOC-led nonprofit 501c3. And what's left to do with all this sort of research? Completion. I need to complete the displays that hopefully can become a part of a mobile exhibit that could go from county to county, which I'll show you in a second, and still pursue efforts to commemorate folks in Hastings that they're almost entirely unaware of. Pioneers, settlers, mavericks in their own right, activists. With that in mind, I was able to connect with a Marvel illustrator, Marvel as in DC and Marvel, who lives in Hastings. I forgot his slide. Tom Nguyen, Vietnamese American that lives in Hastings and draws for Marvel and CBS network. And came up with a graphic novelization idea of the story so that it can live in a hard copy form and be sold just and more tangible instead of always having to sit folks down and deliver the oral history. It's tentatively titled Welcome to Hastings, a little clever wordplay, but we changing that, but I put my head in the space of a 13-year-old comic loving boy, and probably who might gravitate to, a title that was, jumped out and with something a little more actiony. These are a few stills frames that Tom has already drawn. The work is in progress, but we've got a few drawings that we're going to show at the Rivertown Days in Hastings. Mark your calendars, July 15th, July 16th. In Hastings, we have a booth. You'll find us, BR4R.org, or just look for where there's any of those images that you may have seen in this PowerPoint. So the displays that I was referring to earlier, This is an example of a mock-up of sort of the beginnings of the Black community. They'd been, since the census was taken in 1857 and noted that there was one Black person, there very well obviously could have been more that preceded the census. So I'm marking that in sort of an impressionistic way. This isn't meant to be definitive, but I've pulled articles that note the suffrage cause, the activism, the successes, the business owning of Dakota County with a semi-focus on Hastings, and put it in display form. MNHS used to have, or maybe they still have, a placard of Black history that sort of started with George Bonga and ended at Jimmy Jam and Terry Lewis in '92. So I thought, not only does it need a refresh, it also needs updating and expansion. So this timeline is part of that idea, and it should be completed mid-July. It will be completed by mid-July, and it explores all of the topics that Black folks encountered in not only in those small communities, but there it explains sort of the exodus to South Minneapolis as well. Because by 1954, that's when the last colored person died in Hastings, and their population, the Black population, remained at 0 until the 90s. Thank you. And I might be wrong on that 0, but it never matched, it never equaled the population that they had in the 1900s until the 90s. So 30 people. And if you have questions, hopefully I can hear them and answer them.